Hey, what is up, my friends? I'm Toby Wayne. This is Toby Wayne Studios. And tonight's video, I wanted to talk a little tiny bit about the importance of primer. And here you see, bam, I got 25% more Krylon Color Master Primer in the gray color, of course. This stuff is fantastic. I get asked quite a bit what primer I use, if I use a primer, and people ask me also, is it important to use a primer? And I dare say, yes. Yes, it is important. And here's the reason why. Resin has a tendency to want to be a slick material. And then also included in that, sometimes the resin will actually leach oils. Because it has, natural oils and also chemicals that are in the resin itself. And also the big one too is a lot of people will use a release agent in their molds or whatnot. So when a resin casting comes out, it will have natural oils on it, dirt, grime. It'll also have those chemicals that are involved in the curing processes of a resin casting. So with that being said, I always like to give myself a nice, when I cast something up, I like to give a nice scrub down of the resin castings with like a Ajax dish soap or Dawn or whatever, cuts grease, that kind of thing. But anyway, I will do a nice quick scrub down of that. Also, I've noticed lately what I've been doing is sometimes I have an issue with like resin leaching, and that's going to be a separate video on its own. But what I'll do is I'll use a 99% rubbing alcohol, and I'll just give it a good clean wipe down to make sure that all the oils and dirt and grime and everything is off of the resin casting. Then once that's done, I will come in with my gray primer, and I will just spray a good couple coats of primer on these. In some cases, I don't necessarily hit the whole thing completely. There's a few little spots. Obviously, I don't worry about up on the inside of the resin casting. And sometimes when I do a spray, sometimes I won't get up inside the nostrils, or I might get maybe 97% sprayed with the primer. But that's just to make sure that and the primer acts as a like a grip for the paints. The acrylic paints won't want to stick to the resin casting if you just have it in that resin casting form and don't clean it and don't prime it. But I'm a firm believer in painting, spraying a good couple coats of primer on there to really make sure that the paints will adhere. Then once the paints are adhered, then I will spray it with a matte finish. So to cover the topic of this video, it is very important to use a primer on specifically resin castings. Now, I will say this. When you're doing a sculpture out of, say, Super Sculpey or Magic Sculpt or Abe's Epoxy or whatever it is, those aren't necessarily that important to prime because it doesn't have those oils or that slick surface that the resin casting will have. So that's just my thought. Some guys don't prime at all and they'll paint stuff up, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. I just like to have that reassurance that that paint is really going to adhere to that resin casting. It's just a good idea to have it. Just my thoughts, because I have seen other guys that have done like resin castings and have done it, and it's been a success. But for me, I like to do a couple of coats. Also, the primer will act as a visual guide for me to see little imperfections that I may have missed if I didn't prime it, or if I do a different primer. Like I used to use black quite a bit. And I had started with the gray, then I switched to the black, and I was using that for quite some time. And I was noticing that the black primer really wasn't showing up that good on camera. I've lightened up my camera here a little bit so you can see this much easier. But compared to the two, I definitely prefer the gray primer, and it helps me to see little imperfections better. Like I see a little, just the tiniest little tiny bit of a seam line. You may not even be able to see it, but there's just a tiny bit. So that primer will actually also not only give myself the paint something to hang on to, but it will also show me little imperfections, maybe little pinholes or whatever, if I do have little imperfections in my casts. So anyway, I just wanted to cover that. I've gotten quite a few questions as of late about what primer I use. I use the Krylon gray primer. Now with 25% more. Bam! So yeah, good stuff. I really prefer the gray Krylon brand, but there are so many different types of brands of primer out there. So it's really up to you what you do. Prime it, don't prime it, whatever you feel is right in your heart. But for me, I like to prime, and it's the gray. So anyway, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the new subscribers as well. You guys are awesome, and I appreciate it. We're getting close. I think we're like 600 and something now. So once we hit 1,000, I'm going to do another giveaway of one of my sculpts, something. I don't know yet. But anyway, thank you guys so much for checking this video out. And as usual, I will catch you in the very next video.